There is an invisible, silent architecture to the survival of nations that empires simply cannot comprehend, no matter how many satellites they launch or how many operatives they deploy. When a global superpower, built on centuries of extraction and dominance, decides that it wants to eliminate a geopolitical threat, they rely entirely on the tangible mechanisms of power. They rely on the highly classified satellite imagery that tracks movement from the exosphere. They rely on the targeted, unmanned drone strikes operated from air-conditioned rooms thousands of miles away. They rely on the millions of dollars in untraceable, unmarked briefcases used to buy the loyalty of weak men. And, when all other avenues of diplomacy and economic sabotage have been thoroughly exhausted, they rely on the silent assassins dispatched in the dead of night. This has been the standard, undeniable operating procedure of Western intelligence agencies operating on the African continent for well over half a century. If a leader cannot be bought with foreign aid, if a leader cannot be intimidated by the threat of crippling economic sanctions, the final, desperate solution of the empire is always the bullet. It is a tragic, brutally repetitive script that has left a trail of immense sorrow across the global South. It is the exact same playbook that claimed the life of Patrice Lumumba in the Congo, a man whose only crime was demanding that the vast, immeasurable mineral wealth of his nation be used to build schools and hospitals for his people, rather than enriching the mining conglomerates of Belgium and the United States. Thus, it is the exact same shadow operation that orchestrated the heartbreaking assassination of Thomas Sankara, the upright man of Burkina Faso, who was gunned down by his own brother-in-arms, a Judas figure corrupted by the whispering promises of the French intelligence apparatus. For decades, the message from the West has been chillingly clear and consistently enforced. If you challenge the neo-colonial extraction of wealth, you will be swiftly eliminated. Your character will be assassinated in the global press, and your country will be deliberately plunged into a state of manufactured chaos. But right now, in the treacherous, shifting geopolitical theater of the Sahel, the empire's sharpened blade is dulling against an impenetrable, invisible wall. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the young, unyielding leader of Burkina Faso, has successfully survived multiple highly coordinated assassination plots and complex coup attempts. The Western intelligence apparatus, usually so efficient in its lethal methodologies, is utterly baffled. The directors of the DGSE in Paris and the strategists of the CIA in Langley are asking themselves in locked, secure briefing rooms how a young military captain, operating in one of the most volatile, porous, and historically unstable regions on the face of the earth, continues to outmaneuver their elite, highly trained operatives. They look at their tactical maps and cannot compute the variables. The answer to their frustration is not found in modern military manuals. The answer is not taught at Sandhurst or West Point. The answer is ancient, spiritual, and deeply rooted in the history of global black resistance. And to truly understand the absolute spectacular failure of Western assassins in Burkina Faso today, you must look across the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean to the misty, impenetrable, and sacred mountains of Jamaica. You must look back through the centuries to understand the ancient, unyielding magic of the Maroon Shield. If you are ready to explore the deep, profound spiritual and tactical connections that unite the global African diaspora, and if you are ready to uncover the historical truths that the mainstream media conglomerates are actively trying to suppress and rewrite, please subscribe to the Red Beret right now. Hit the like button so this vital message can shatter the algorithmic suppression and join our growing community of fearless truth seekers. In the rich, blood-soaked history of Jamaica, the Maroons hold a sacred and almost mythological status that transcends mere historical fact. They were the enslaved Africans who looked at the brutal, dehumanizing reality of the British sugar plantations and made a conscious, dangerous choice to reject it entirely. They chose the perilous, uncertain freedom of the mountains over the guaranteed, agonizing death of the cane fields. Led by visionary, spiritually powerful figures like the legendary Queen Nanny of the Maroons, they formed deeply independent, fiercely guarded communities in the dense, unforgiving, and treacherous terrain known as the Cockpit Country. The British Empire, possessing the most advanced, heavily armed, and well-equipped military force of the 18th century, viewed the Maroons as an existential threat to their entire economic model in the Caribbean. And if the Maroons could exist as free people, the entire psychological foundation of slavery would collapse. And so, the British sent wave after wave of highly trained redcoat soldiers into the jungle to annihilate them. Yet, the British failed spectacularly, time and time again. They failed because the Maroons did not just use the geographical advantage of the terrain. They utilized profound psychological and spiritual warfare. According to the deeply held oral histories of Jamaica, Queen Nanny possessed a spiritual power, rooted in the ancient African practices of Mayal and Obeah, that was so profound she could catch British bullets with her bare hands and fire them back at her oppressors. While Western historians dismiss this as mere folklore, they entirely miss the profound metaphorical truth of the legend. Nanny instituted the blood oath, a sacred, unbreakable spiritual covenant among her people that irrevocably bound them to the soil they defended and to each other. It created a collective psychic shield of absolute unity. When the British soldiers marched into the dense jungle, sweating in their heavy uniforms and terrified of the unseen enemy, they were not fighting a conventional army. They were fighting the jungle itself. Every tree, every shadow, every sound of the Abeng horn echoing through the valleys was a weapon. They were fighting an energy that absolutely refused to die, a people who had collectively agreed that death was vastly preferable to subjugation. Fast forward from the 18th century Caribbean to the 21st century Sahel. The alliance of Sahel states, spearheaded by the military leadership of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, has effectively become a massive geopolitical Maroon community. They have boldly and unapologetically broken away from the neo-colonial plantation of the CFA franc currency system. They have evicted the Western military bases that acted as the overseers of the region. They have aggressively challenged the foreign mining conglomerates that have looted their gold and uranium for generations. And just like the British Empire centuries ago, the modern empires of Paris and Washington have desperately dispatched their invisible forces to crush this rebellion before it inspires the rest of the African continent to seek true independence. Since Captain Traoré took power and ordered the French military and diplomatic missions to pack their bags and leave Ouagadougou, the shadow war has intensified dramatically. Millions of euros and dollars have been pumped into the region to fund mutinies among disgruntled military officers. Proxy mercenary groups have been activated, heavily armed, and directed toward the capital. A relentless, synchronized disinformation machine has worked overtime across international news networks and social media platforms to create the psychological conditions necessary to justify a regime change. They have tried to paint Traoré as a paranoid, isolated dictator, rapidly losing his grip on reality. But the Western intelligence agencies made a fatal miscalculation. They assumed Traoré would rely on the traditional, highly centralized security apparatus that has proven so vulnerable in the past. But Traoré, a keen student of history, activated the modern geopolitical equivalent of the Maroon Shield. And he realized very early on that traditional presidential security details, no matter how elite or well-armed they appear, are fundamentally vulnerable to corruption, infiltration, and the intoxicating lure of foreign money. If he relied solely on the state military apparatus to protect him, he would inevitably suffer the exact same tragic fate as his idol, Thomas Sankara. Sankara was not killed by a foreign army. He was betrayed by Blaise Compaoré, his closest friend and brother-in-arms, a man who allowed his ambition to be corrupted by the whispering promises of the French establishment. Traoré deeply understood this historical trauma. He knew with absolute certainty that he had to build a defense mechanism that foreign money could not possibly buy, and that highly sophisticated intelligence agencies could not possibly hack. And his brilliant, unprecedented solution was the radical decentralization of security and the total spiritual mobilization of the Burkinabe masses. Traoré established and vastly expanded the Volunteers for the Defense of the Homeland, widely known as the VDPs. On the surface, to a Western military analyst sitting in a Pentagon office, this looks like a standard, perhaps desperate, civilian militia. But strategically, psychologically, and spiritually, it is the direct invocation of the ancient blood oath of the Maroons. Traoré armed the farmers in the rural villages. He empowered the market women in the bustling cities. He gave responsibility to the youth and deep respect to the elders. He did not just distribute weapons. He distributed a profound, intoxicating sense of ownership over the destiny of the nation. But he bound the people to the soil of Burkina Faso in a way that no politician in a tailored suit ever could. By doing so, he created a decentralized, omnipresent human shield. When Western intelligence operatives or their locally funded proxies attempt to quietly bribe a military general, or when they try to orchestrate a stealthy coup under the cover of darkness in the capital, they do not just have to bypass the presidential guard. They find themselves staring directly into the vigilant eyes of millions of ordinary citizens who have formed an impenetrable human wall around their leader. You cannot successfully assassinate a man who is actively protected by the collective, awakened consciousness of an entire nation. When foreign operatives try to move through the streets of Ouagadougou, they are not stopped by high-tech, easily hackable facial recognition surveillance cameras. They are spotted by the women selling fruit on the street corner who notice a stranger acting suspiciously. They are reported by the taxi drivers who overhear a conversation in the back seat. They are monitored by the university students who refuse to let their country slide back into the dark ages of neo-colonial servitude. The entire country has organically transformed into an impossibly complex intelligence network, fueled by pure patriotism rather than foreign payrolls. This is the very essence of the Maroon strategy. The empire relies heavily on the frailty of human nature, on individuals betraying their people for a briefcase full of cash or a promise of power. The Maroon Shield works by creating a society where betrayal becomes fundamentally unthinkable, socially unacceptable, and practically impossible, because the people have fully realized that the physical survival of their leader is inextricably linked to their own economic and spiritual survival. The people of Jamaica and the wider Caribbean diaspora watch this incredible dynamic unfolding in West Africa, and they instantly, viscerally recognize the frequency. They see the unyielding, defiant spirit of Nanny of the Maroons echoing powerfully in the tactical brilliance and stoic demeanor of Ibrahim Traoré. They understand implicitly that the Western media's relentless portrayal of Traoré as a paranoid, authoritarian figure is nothing more than a deliberate, desperate psychological projection. The West is projecting their own profound, deep-seated paranoia onto him. They are absolutely terrified because they have lost the element of surprise. They have lost their monopoly on the flow of information. And most importantly, they have lost their ultimate weapon, the monopoly on fear. For generations, the ultimate unspoken weapon of the neo-colonial system was the ever-present threat of violent death. The unspoken rule in the corridors of African power was clear. If you challenge the extraction of our wealth, if you threaten our access to your gold, your uranium, and your labor, you will be violently eliminated, and your country will be plunged into an abyss of chaos as a warning to the rest of the continent. It was a brutal, global mafia protection racket, cleverly disguised as international diplomacy and foreign aid. Captain Traoré has completely, fundamentally neutralized this ultimate weapon by publicly, repeatedly accepting the reality of his own mortality, and while simultaneously making himself operationally immortal through the empowerment of his people. In his public speeches, he does not speak like a politician begging for votes. He speaks with the calm, terrifying, unshakable resolve of a man who has already made peace with the concept of death. He refuses the opulent, isolating luxuries of the presidency that usually separate a leader from the reality of his citizens. He sleeps in the military barracks. He eats the exact same rations as the frontline soldiers fighting the insurgencies. He wears the dusty combat fatigues of a nation locked in a war for its very right to exist. By aggressively stripping away the elitist trappings of power, he has made himself entirely indistinguishable from the masses. And this presents an impossible mathematical problem for the assassins. How do you assassinate a specific target when that target has effectively dispersed its energy, its ideology, and its willpower into 20 million deeply, fiercely loyal people? This is precisely why the assassins keep missing. This is why the meticulously planned coups keep failing before they even begin. The DGSE and the CIA are trying to play a traditional game of geopolitical chess, maneuvering their expensive pieces on a board, trying to corner and capture the king. But Ibrahim Traoré has flipped the entire board over. He is playing an entirely different game, governed by the spiritual physics of Pan-African resistance and the undeniable gravity of historical justice. He has drawn a massive, uncrossable circle of absolute sovereignty around the Sahel, and the moment hostile actors cross that sacred threshold, they are immediately swallowed by the terrain, exposed by the citizens, and neutralized by the shield. The psychological toll this incredible resistance is taking on the Western political and intelligence establishment is truly staggering to witness. For the first time in modern history, they are watching their carefully constructed, multi-billion-dollar empire of influence crumble rapidly, not under the weight of a competing foreign superpower like Russia or China, but under the sheer, unyielding, unapologetic willpower of African self-determination. The alliance of Sahel states is proving to the entire global South that the only thing required to defeat the most powerful empire in human history is the absolute, uncompromising refusal to surrender. As this shadow war inevitably continues, the global diaspora must critically recognize their active role in this monumental historical moment. The Maroon communities of Jamaica did not survive in a historical vacuum. They survived because they fiercely maintained their connection to the ancient ways, to the rhythm of the drum, to the unyielding spirit of resistance passed down from the ancestors. Today, in the digital age, the global diaspora is the drum. By actively amplifying the truth, by aggressively exposing the manipulative lies of the mainstream media, and by maintaining a unified, impenetrable spiritual front across the oceans, the descendants of the transatlantic trade are actively reinforcing the energetic shield that currently protects the Sahel. Your awareness is a weapon. Your voice is a shield. The empire, driven by desperation and the impending collapse of its economic model, will not stop trying. They will print more money to fund more chaos. They will deploy more sophisticated cyber warfare. They will desperately search every corner of the Sahel for a modern-day Judas willing to break the blood oath for 30 pieces of silver. But the fundamental energy of the continent has shifted. The paralyzing fear of the oppressor has evaporated into the hot desert air. The ghosts of the Atlantic have returned in full force to stand eternal guard over the motherland. Captain Ibrahim Traoré continues to walk calmly through the valley of the shadow of death, completely untouched, entirely unbothered, because he knows with absolute certainty that he does not walk alone. He is shielded by the fierce, immortal magic of the ancestors, and he is protected by the unyielding love of his people. The Maroon Shield holds firm, its golden energy repelling the desperate strikes of a dying system. And the empire is finally, painfully learning what it means to be truly, comprehensively powerless in the face of destiny. Please leave a comment below and share your deepest thoughts on the spiritual and tactical warfare happening right now in the Sahel. Do you see the unbreakable spirit of the Jamaican Maroons living on in the alliance of Sahel states? Do you believe the shield will hold against the coming storms? Let us know your thoughts. Stay awake, stay unified, and never, ever forget the immense power of your history.